and welcome to the Hybrid School Builders Podcast. I am your host, Rebecca Foley, and I am so glad you are joining me today. I am a fellow grassroots founder who is hoping to make your journey toward founding a sustainable hybrid school a little bit easier. If you are dreaming of starting a hybrid school, or perhaps you've already gotten started, you are in the right place. Join me as we dive into real stories, practical tips, and hard-won lessons that I have learned to help you launch and grow your program with confidence. Remember, building a hybrid school is not just about creating a business or creating jobs. It's not even about just serving the children who attend the program. It's literally about reshaping the landscape of education, and we can do that one community, one entrepreneur, and one program at a time. Hey guys, welcome. Today, I wanted to touch on something that's probably one of the hardest emotional things for a founder to do. Now, this depends on what your situation is, so let me explain what I'm talking about. I'm talking about separating yourself from your business. Now, the actual business distinction, if you're a nonprofit, you pretty much have to legally separate yourself. You're kind of forced into it as a nonprofit. If you're an LLC, you and your business are very close to being the same thing as far as the money that's made and who owns it, and it kind of is you. It's not you in the sense of a sole proprietorship, but you are the business owner. And if you stop working, the business is no longer in existence, right? That's not true for a nonprofit. Anyway, that's what it looks like on paper. Emotionally, there's different levels of how closely the business, the hybrid school, is connected to you. And by that, I mean your own interests as a person, maybe your career, your well-being, your financial status, or your children's needs. Okay, so let me give you an example. Let's say that you're a teacher and you were working in a public school system and you had your salary and your benefits and all of that. And you want to leave for whatever reason, right? There's any number of reasons. And you want to start a program. By the way, there's nothing at all wrong with any of these things. Let me be clear about that. There's nothing wrong with any of the scenarios that I'm going to talk about, but I'm just explaining why it can be difficult to separate the two. Okay, so you need to replace maybe all or most of the income you had as a teacher, okay? So you need this program to support you financially, all right? There's nothing wrong with that, but it can be difficult to separate that need that you personally have from what's going to make the organization successful, maybe what families can pay, actually, what they actually want out of the program, okay? Now, this can also look like something that you need for your children, right? Maybe you need a kindergarten class, or maybe you need a middle school class. Maybe you feel like your child would thrive with a 2-day program. Maybe your child would thrive with a 4-day or a 5-day program, and you really want this school to work for your child. Again, there is nothing at all wrong with this. In fact, it's often an indicator of what the rest of the market needs too, okay? But it's very important in your planning process, especially, at least to head in the right direction, that you're able to say, well, this is what I would like, maybe what I actually really need for my family, for my kid, for me, whatever. But before I jump in with both feet and say, this is what I'm going to build, this is what it needs to look like, this is the revenue I need, this is the frequency I need, whatever, you need to make sure that there are enough people to support it, right? And that's just a market economics sort of thing, right? You might be able to find a handful of people who have the exact same need you have, and maybe the money to pay for it, but not enough to actually make this dream vision sustainable. I talk about this in the planning course a little bit when I talk about your model, your vision, and who you are and what you need and what you want to do in this. And then you have to kind of build that theoretically this is what I'd like, a 5-day program, a 3-day program, whatever, right? I'd like it to be this big. I'd like it to run this many hours. I want it to offer this many subjects. If you're a teacher leaving their job, you might say, I need it to bring in this much money because I need to be able to pay myself this much money, okay? But then you have to set that aside for a second. You have to go do research to see if your market can actually sustain that. And then you have to bring those two things together so that you build a program that's sustainable for the market and hopefully also meets your needs. But you have to feel out how you're going to compromise what your vision might be if your market is sending you very disparate signals about what they need, okay? So that is really important to do in the beginning, all right? As you get further into the process, you have to still keep this in mind. Like, let's say that you are building a 2-day program and that's what you wanted. That's what you wanted for your kids. You only wanted to work part-time. You're building a 2-day program and let's say your market is responding very well. Everything's going great. People are coming. You're filling your classes. You have your part-time job. Your kids have the part-time school. You're able to homeschool. Everything's going great, okay? This is excellent. And maybe you're 2 or 3 years in and this is like going pretty well, right? But then let's say you hit some organizational decision that needs to be made, okay? A lot of hybrid programs have had issues with their building, right? Their host building, either because of growth or because of sharing or whatever. Maybe it's a building issue, okay? Maybe it's a staffing issue, right? Maybe you're having trouble keeping staff. Maybe you're having trouble finding people who can only work part-time. And it's actually affecting like the ability of your program, like how sustainable you're going to be, how stable you're going to be in the future, all right? I'll give you an example where a program was really having a hard time finding a space for a while, for several years. They were growing. Everything was going well as far as that went. They were having a problem finding a really welcoming space that was within their budget, and it was causing a problem. They had to move a couple of times, which is very energy draining, very like impactful. It's hard to plan around all of that. And they also had a wait list of kids getting in for this 2-day program. It was starting to get quite popular, and there was more and more people. But they couldn't fit any more kids into the 2 days. Okay, to take those extra kids would be to have another set of 2 days. A lot of demand for like the younger years and stuff. And what happens sometimes is that, let's say the teachers or maybe the director, some of the staff are like, well, I don't want to work 4 days, right? Because maybe they're homeschooling their own kids, hybrid schooling their own kids, and they're like, how are we going to run a 4-day program? I only wanted to work 2 days. Okay. There's absolutely no obligation to run a 4-day program, except that the stability of the program was being heavily impacted because it's a building problem, right? They couldn't find a building that was welcoming. Okay. Now, there's multiple pieces going on, right? For instance, a 4-day program might make a building even less welcoming because it's often churches, right? They didn't want people there 4 days a week. They only wanted them there 2 days a week, okay? But they're looking at commercial spaces. Okay, we don't want to share. This is difficult. We want a commercial space where we can just rent and we can have full use of the building all the time. Okay, well, you can't rent a commercial space unless you're, I guess, subletting or sharing it with somebody on a 2-day income revenue stream. You just can't do that, right? You can't pay for 5 days a week and then have a 2-day program and have the building sit empty. That's just not going to work, right? Which means that the stability that the program needs, this is the key point, the stability that the program needed, possibly, to actually be able to thrive in its physical space, and the market was there. That was the other thing. You don't just make this decision if you're like already having trouble getting students. You're literally turning people away. You're turning money away. You're turning kids away because there's nowhere to put them. You're also having trouble with your space. Okay. And then you see a building, a space that would work, but you would have to have a 4 or 5-day program. But you have the kids there. Okay. Now, this is the problem, right? It's very hard to separate. You love this program. You love your work. You love your teachers. You love your staff. everything's working beautifully. Why do you have to expand? You don't want to, right? But the program itself, the sustainability, the stability, the morale of your teachers, the quality of the programming is being heavily impacted by the building situation, okay? And you have this building available, and you could afford it if you just had two-day programs and then like an enrichment day. But who's going to run it? You don't want to run it. You didn't want to work 4 days a week or 5 days a week, right? You have to homeschool your own kids, okay? This is one of the instances where you have to be able to stop and say, okay, why am I doing this? If I want this program to survive and thrive, and I want to be able to fit into this work, but I also need the program to thrive for the sake of my families and my students and financial stability and not having to move all the time or whatever, what are the solutions here? Now, assuming, and I talked about this in my last episode, risk assessment and resource allocation. I am not by any means saying that you should just jump into the first thing. In that episode, I even talked about how moves are a huge ordeal, right? And like buying a building is a very risky thing. Signing into a long-term expensive lease contract is extremely risky unless you absolutely know that you're going to have the programming and the revenue and all of that, right? That's not a good idea unless you're quite positive that this is going to be what's the best thing for your program. But there's some risk assessment there that you have to do and some forecasting and all of that. So I'm not saying you go get the building. You don't grow for the sake of growing. But let's say that the best solution that you've found for this particular recurring problem that's really impacting your organization is leasing a building that's expensive and is going to require a 4 or 5 day program. You've looked at all the other options. You've got the kids. You just don't want to work 5 days a week, right? That's the only thing that's holding you back, okay? So we're assuming that all those things are in place. This is where it can be very difficult to separate yourself, right? Because you're like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I either have to make myself work 4 or 5 days a week or what? Well, if you just step back and say, is there a way that I can rearrange my responsibilities so that I can hire somebody? Maybe I hire a co-director. Maybe I kind of step back and hire someone who can work the 4 days and I just oversee and train them, okay? And then maybe you can work 1 day of each or something, right? Like there's different options, but what you have to do is be able to separate your own personal interests, this is my point, from the good of the program, okay? Now, another example might be like maybe the micro school, I need to replace my job example, where you really need to work 5 days a week and you need to be able to charge $10,000 a student and you need to have 10 students so that you can bring in $100,000, pay your rent, pay your whatever, and still have a decent-ish full-time income, right? Okay, that's what you need in order to leave your job. But you can't find that many kids that are going to pay that much money. So you might have to run 2 hybrid programs so that you can work full-time. You might really want to be able to teach 5th and 6th graders. That's what maybe your own kids are that age. Maybe that's your experience. That's what you want to work with. But the demand is actually with kindergarten and 1st graders. Okay, so you're having to figure out how to separate your own personal interest from what the market will actually be able to support, but also from what is going to create a sustainable and stable program, which ultimately your interests are wrapped up in that, right? Because if you don't have a sustainable, stable program, your kids are going to have anywhere to go and you're not going to have anywhere to work, right? But it can be difficult to separate those things, okay? And this can happen on other levels of maybe you want to teach in a classroom. Maybe you want to be the teacher. Maybe there's certain pieces of it you would really like to be able to do, but you have some personal limitations that means you just can't do it. As much as you like it, you can't. So you have to kind of like let go of that so that the program can succeed. Maybe you have to hire somebody. Maybe you have to outsource something. Maybe you just have to trust somebody else with a piece of it. It's hard to do that when it's kind of your baby, it's your vision. You love the work, but you just only have so much capacity, right? So you have to trust somebody else with it. Again, you're separating yourself from the organization and what's good for the organization. And that can be difficult to do. One more example that was something I have heard. These are all veiled real stories. Okay, so another example might be somebody who starts the program specifically for the needs of a particular child. Maybe it's a special need that they have, maybe it's a social need that they have, or whatever. And they're focused on making sure that this fits their child. There's nothing at all wrong with that, but it's not good business if it doesn't also match what is sustainable and stable and what the market can support, okay? So if you're trying to force something to work because you really want it to work for your child, but you keep trying to force it and it's just not working, it's probably because you are letting your personal desire to make this work because it will work for your family or your child cloud why it isn't working, why the business itself isn't working, why people aren't responding, why people aren't coming. I'll say again, this is not like a judgment at all. Like, I have been personally in this situation. I've watched this. It's really hard to take a vision that you have, something you've poured hundreds, thousands of hours of work into, that you've suffered through the hard parts and climbed the learning curve of figuring this stuff out, and then have to make a decision for the good of the business that's not really for the good of you, right? Not really the best thing for you personally, for your family, for your kid maybe, but it's kind of what you have to do to make the business survive, okay? That is really difficult to do. It's hard to hand over control over things when you're like, I just really want to do that. I love doing it, and I just don't have the capacity, and I have to trust somebody else to do it. Maybe they have to get paid more than you because they're able to. They have the capacity and the skill to do something. Maybe they just have the time to do it. You have to go find that person, hire them, and pay them. And you're like, well, I got to pay them more than me to be the supervisor because I can't be there as much as I would like to. Maybe your babysitting changed, or you had a parent who needs care, or something in your personal life that changed, or just was never there. And you have to give somebody else the job that you really maybe deserved or work to get to. But the organization itself will be impacted negatively if you are only doing what you have the capacity for, or what you're comfortable with, or anything like that, or it's just for your own interests for your family, okay? So, like I said, it's kind of a difficult topic. It's not really something that we like to think about necessarily. And a lot of times you don't have to make those really difficult decisions. A lot of times what works for you and what works for the organization is the same thing, right? Maybe growth is really good for you and for the organization. Maybe staying small is good for you and for the organization, and everything's just fine. And you don't have to make any really difficult decisions like that. That's great, right? But sometimes it does happen. And the difficult skill is being able to say, okay, I just have to set my emotions aside so that it can be helpful maybe to talk to someone who's more objective. And I need you to be really honest with me. I can see that the solution for the organization is this, but it's going to impact me this way. And I'm so either scared or uncomfortable or whatever doing this. Or do you see something that I don't see? And they might be like, well, you have to, this is what you have to do. And you're like, well, I can't do that. And you have to be able to be willing to say oh, okay, I'm just not able to see what the solution is because of how it's going to impact me personally. And I need to be able to set my personal feelings aside and my personal interests aside to make sure that the organization is succeeding. Now, if you started the organization, and I guess this is kind of a caveat here, if you literally only are running the organization for your work or your child, and you really have no interest in running it otherwise, then what you really need to do is your research really well to make sure that whatever this model is, whatever this budget is, whatever this tuition is, whatever this size is, whatever this frequency is, that you need to work, right? The age of the kids, the size, whatever it is, that you need to work for you and your family really is well researched. And then you have to make sure that it is sustainable before you jump in, okay? You have to do that. And if it's not, you probably just need to not do it, right? Because sometimes you won't know until you're in it a little bit, but you really want to do your research extra well if you're going to, say, leave your job or build a program for a particular child and you are not willing to compromise what you need for what the organization might need because you just have no interest in running it if it's not going to work for you, okay? And again, that's not a judgment. That's okay. That's okay. It really is. But you have to be aware of that. You have to be able to name that and say, I'm really building this for me. I'm building this for my own job. I'm building this for my own child. And then you have to go in with your eyes open and realize that is what you're doing. And that's going to be a determining factor in your decisions. Okay. And by the way, if you're a nonprofit, you really can't do that. Okay. Because you're really going to get yourself in trouble if you start a nonprofit like that, because the board is going to be able to call you out on that and say, this is a missional organization. It's got a mission and a vision, and the mission and vision isn't your job or your child. Okay, this is tough talk here. It's not going to work if it's a nonprofit. But if it's an LLC and you're starting to start a business, that's okay. You just don't want to get yourself into it a year or two and then realize that you just really hadn't done your research well, and you really just have no interest in doing this unless it's going to work for your family. Okay. So you have to be able to see it and name it. And you do have to be able to step aside and be objective about things sometimes. And if it really is the vision and the mission is why you're doing this, you want to serve these kids in the community, and hopefully your children or your job also benefit, but it's really about the mission and vision of the organization separate from you. If you can see that clearly, you can set aside when it impacts you personally and just say, this is going to be hard for me, but I can see what the solution is. Bring other people alongside of you when you're making those decisions and allow them to call you out on things and say, okay, yeah, this is hard for me to do. It's hard for me to see because it's going to impact me personally. But we need to make a decision based on what's good for the organization. Okay, so I hope that made sense. It's common, it's hard, but it is really important to be able to separate yourself and your interests from your organization when you're making especially big decisions on sustainability and stability that might involve growth and staffing and the size of things, tuition, all of those things. When you're making those decisions, you have to be able to separate yourself from that. Thanks so much for listening today. Don't forget to subscribe and make sure you check out the resources I am developing at startahybridSchool.com. Send me an email anytime. I would love to hear from you. Until next time.